Welcome everyone to our third broadcast. I'm Madhu Vishwanathan. We are in a conference room at the Business Instructional Facility at the University of Illinois. It continues to be a severe winter. The roads were quite icy today. It's been snow and then the snow becoming ice. So I have to count this as one of the bad winters. I tried to rationalize, but it's time to admit it. This time we have some of our team members here. We have Alex.
Alejandra. Hello, everyone.
We have Norma. And we have Srini. Hi. We also have participants in the course who will be posing questions, and we'll provide those instructions very soon. Before we go to the discussion of today's session, a couple of thoughts. You will note that much of our virtual immersion was not necessarily about products and needs, but about larger life circumstances as well. That's where we really need to begin. And this is very important because of the complexity of each subsistence context, as well as the unfamiliarity that many of us have with these settings. And I can point to myself as a good example of that when I started out this work. You also began to see immersion exercises. In coming weeks, we'll go through some exercises to understand needs and select one to focus on and to generate ideas in the second part of the course. We'll be very focused on applying our learning to design solutions, which is an interesting exercise for this online medium. And I have to say, you are educating us on what is possible in the way you are using this medium. We are learning a lot from you. The project milestones we are receiving are a great example of what is possible in this medium, and together we should push the envelope. Week 4 covers field research in Lesson 7 and environmental issues in Lesson 8. We have a video of a recent conversation and observation, as well as videos about how we organize student field immersion experiences with remarks from students as well as organizers. Now, speaking about the video of a recent conversation and observation, I want to emphasize that this is not an example of an in-depth interview where we would make sure things are confidential and sit down and talk to people. This is more an example of an observation and a conversation. And it's similar to what we asked you to complete for the first project milestone. It's a good way to understand issues for you in field research in terms of how to ask questions and so on. And we are not saying that this is the way to ask questions. We just want to provide you with one example of how we happen to go about this particular observation and conversation. For those who are not familiar with this type of field research, we wanted you to wrestle with this on your own in week 1. For the project milestone, rather than show you a video, because we really want you to create your own way of having a sincere and empathetic conversation. Now let's move to questions, and for that I'm going to turn things over to Norma.
Good morning for us in Illinois, and hello for the rest of the world. And I see that Barbara and David have joined us this morning, and we have Barbara's question in the screen. Barbara is asking, in the forum the students discussed about what skills do customers in American subsistence have compared to those in India. Mm-hmm. What do you think about this?
Okay. That is a very interesting issue. I'm going to speculate and say the following, even though I spent a lot of time in this arena. If I were to take somebody with very little education in the US, and compare them to somebody with very little education in India, let's say 3rd grade or 4th grade. And when you think about that, you have to kind of stop and wonder what it means to have a 3rd or 4th grade education. It's very interesting to see how in the US, if you have that low level of literacy, you are quite isolated. You don't necessarily have the social networks that you could have in India. So ironically, in India, what happens is, you have to be an entrepreneur yourself in some ways. You learn to sell something. You have a lot of verbal communication. There are lots of people you can ask, and they're not necessarily going to answer you, but it's a very one-on-one world. And people go and bargain and look at generic things and buy and so on. And as a result, they develop their skills. So there is this stepping stone. There is this one-on-one interactional world, which is a stepping stone for people to learn and improve their skills. In the US, you don't have that kind of a stepping stone. You tend to deal with large supermarkets. You tend to deal with technology that adds for you. And you tend to have information on packages which assume a certain level of literacy. Now, these are all good things, please don't get me wrong, but if you're low literate, it's difficult for you to participate and use this as a stepping stone to learn, so you can be quite isolated. So it's a very ironic thing, this kind of a comparison. I also want to say I made a very sweeping statement, because rural, semi-rural, and urban India is different, and the same goes for the US as well. Each context is different, but if I were to really contrast the two, that would be my observation.
David has a question. Madhu, what are the goals of this course? What ideally would you like students to be able to do after taking this course?
Thank you very much, David. I think the thing I started the course off with and I end it with is how challenging it is to work in this setting. To me, I think more than anything, the notion that whether we grew up in poverty or whether we grew up middle class or upper middle class or wherever we are, the idea of studying people living in this setting before we assume that we know is extremely important. And I'm a good example of that, and my education is a long way from done. I think that's perhaps the biggest takeaway, that we need to sit down and understand. I'll give you an example. Very often in some of these countries, and I can use India as an example, people will think, yeah, I know how the poor bargain. I know they are very good at these different skills because I see when I go and buy this or that. Yes, but you're seeing from a distance, and you're seeing them in a certain role. You're not sitting down and talking to them in order to learn from them. And so as a result, what happens is when you sit down and talk to them, you realize that, yes, they have tremendous strengths, but they have a lot of vulnerabilities as well. Just as I have a lot of strengths and I have a lot of vulnerabilities, it's no different. And it's so important to understand this. I don't think people are victims, and I don't think people are natural entrepreneurs. I think you see a mix of both, and it's so important to keep that in mind. So I would say the first big takeaway is try to understand subsistence marketplaces in your own context. And the second takeaway certainly is use that understanding as you design solutions. Because one of the things that happens when we design solutions is we're back to the drawing board, we're thinking about products, we're thinking about business plans, we're thinking about partners, and we've already created a distance from the grounded insights that we may have had when we looked at a subsistence context. So really, keeping those insights. So one of the things we do, and you're going to do this as well, is we try to make sure and go back and say, what's the world from the 2-acre farmer's point of view? Let's build that back up. Let's not forget that when we design the product or when we design the business plan. So to keep that bottom-up understanding throughout the process is, I would say, the second big takeaway. These are all good things to talk about in the abstract. I hope we give you enough concrete exercises to play this out. I really hope that's the case. But thank you. That's a great question, David.
Barbara, you want to unmute your microphone and ask the question directly? Well, Barbara is trying that. We cannot hear you. You need to unmute your microphone from the top, Barbara.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you listen to me?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. Hello, David. It appears we are the only two connected. Is it right? Anyway, nice to meet you, because I'm very happy to attend this course. I really felt the need for a course like this, because I have been interested in development and in studying microfinance, and I have been also in Bangladesh and to study this topic, but there was not much about subsistence marketplaces, and I was surprised when I met some people in these rural areas, and we tried to understand how they used the loans, because I was not getting a clear picture of what happens and what what was our ability to support them in doing an important step in the ladder out of poverty, that is to stabilize a little bit better their business and to be able to grow a little bit to small entrepreneurs. That's the point. So it's a very complex theme, and I would like to to know if you think we can somehow learn and be able to help microfinance institution in supporting business creation. Because when I look also for consulting, I work in the government and I'm more in trade promotion and investment promotion, but sometimes I look for a volunteer or also consulting project. I take a leave and work on this. And I didn't see much about business support in these projects. It's all about the loan, lending, but not much about how to use it. So I don't know if there's a room for this and for us to help in this field.
Thank you, Barbara. I'll just make one point about, once again, the need for a bottom-up approach as it relates to microfinancing, and then I'm going to ask Srini to address your question. I just wanted to say, going back to David's question as well, that, what we find when we think about resources, financial resources and other resources, are how fungible they are, how people move resources between family and supplier and customer and so on. And we covered some of this in one of the lessons. So it's very interesting how people move resources, and that's very important for microfinancing institutions to understand, I think, because once again, you have to be bottom up in order to create your top down as well. You have to go back and forth on something like this. So if I say, look, I'm giving you a loan and it's got to be for business purposes, very often the resources are moved round and round and round. I mean, I'm going to, make sure my customer gets credit, but at the same time, I'm going to make sure that, my family, survives. And there are certain situations where my family cannot be the cushion. They cannot keep supporting what we are doing and starving and so on. In those situations, I have to move resources there. So that's what we mean by bottom up, going underneath umbrella terms like social capital and seeing how these exchanges work, how these transactions work. Now, having done that, if you're an institution, you also have to be top down. And so there you have to think about, well, given this understanding, how do I design what I do? And so you have to be thinking about how to, design your microfinancing approach. One of the things that the local lenders have, whether there's somebody in the community or it's money lenders, is they have flexibility. They know the people there. So we have seen some really wonderful examples of community lenders. These are women who will essentially meet somebody else while they are filling up, water at the public tap or public faucet. And that's when they'll ask, you need to pay today. And the reply may be that I can't do this today, or maybe tomorrow. And so there's so much flexibility built in there. At the same time, we have money lenders who also know the community and so on. And so somehow that kind of bottom-up understanding has to be absorbed into, the microfinancing institution. I will just say one thing from my perspective, which is I believe that in order for somebody who is of low income, subsistence, to participate in the marketplace, I view the world, and this is oversimplified, in terms of three different things they need. They need financial resources. They need access to buy and sell, and by access I also mean value, and proper remuneration for the value they're creating, which can be quite difficult in rural areas. And the third thing they need is what I end up calling marketplace literacy, which is really skills, self-confidence and awareness of rights and so on. So and that's where, for me, microfinancing fits in. Our own social initiative has been more on the education side with marketplace literacy. I apologize for the long answer. Over to Srini.
I wanted to quickly talk about the issue of supporting entrepreneurs who are already working in these contexts. And one thing that I'd like to point out is the issue of marketplace literacy, right? So finance is certainly one dimension, being able to provide people with finance, which provides resources to build inventory, to construct a shop, to various things. And the other dimension is that of understanding of the marketplace, which is understanding of why should we do certain things? Why should we do this business as opposed to other business? So another dimension is, of course, access to marketplaces. Many of these components, I think, go hand in hand in supporting entrepreneurs in these local contexts. So I see our role mainly as removing some of the barriers, but I think the fundamental energy for running the enterprise comes from within the context itself. All we can do is perhaps remove some barriers along the way.
David has a question. I don't know if David is going to ask the question himself. Will you ask your question, David?
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. I spent about 3 years living in a rural community in Haiti. And what's remarkable to me is how similar what I experienced there, interacting on a day-to-day basis with the consumers and the sellers in that marketplace, how similar it is to the lives of the people living in Haiti, living in India that we've been experiencing this course. I'd like to ask, to what extent you believe that these same behaviors, these same market interactions exist throughout the world, throughout subsistence marketplace contexts throughout the world.
Where are you calling us from, David?
Oh, I'm from Toronto, Canada, where the snow is falling right now. Not as cold as it's been the past few days. We've had some cold weather.
Thank you very much, David. Again, another very interesting question. So let me try to give different levels of my answer to this. My first answer, and that's I hope sincere humility, is we don't know. And the reason I say that is I think I'm going to spend the rest of my life going to different contexts and really trying to address this core issue that you raised, David, which is what are the similarities, what are the differences. My second answer is, given what we know, that I think a number of the thinking patterns generalize, and they may manifest in different ways. If I'm living in the here and now, and I have a low literacy, and I know that I have to somehow, get my next meal, then there are certain thinking patterns that we are observing in different continents. In one place, in the US, it may be that I buy the cheapest. In Tanzania, with the tribal community that has to walk for an hour to get to the main road in the marketplace, it may be that I buy the biggest. But whatever it is, it's this tendency to focus in on one piece of information and difficulty abstracting between that piece of information and other pieces of information, which we call concrete thinking. Pictographic thinking, again, I really think it's very rudimentary in the sense that what I see is what I get. So I think certain thinking patterns may generalize. As we move closer and closer to cultural issues, of course, there are quite a few differences. But at the same time, in many settings, we see how socially rich people are. Resource poor, material resource poor, but socially rich as well. We see those things. At the same time, we have to be very careful not to romanticize poverty. These are very harsh circumstances, and the same social relationships cut both ways. On the one hand, they can lead to trust. On the other hand, they can lead to somebody being ostracized because they didn't follow a tradition. It can lead to public humiliation as the means to enforce a non-collateral loan. So we see those aspects as well. Finally, I wanted to say one other thing, David, that even to understand across context, I really believe that it's very important to go deep into each of these contexts. So what you've done in Haiti is just terrific. I mean, to spend 3 years in that community, that is such deep immersion. It's something that we dream about, to have that kind of an immersion. I think it's so important to go deep in order to then go broad. I think sometimes we kind of stay at the surface and we go from one setting to another setting. I'd much rather go deep in 2 or 3 settings and really understand it in order to even draw this contrast. And our approach has been to do that. Currently, we are engaged in 4 continents, but wherever we are very limited, but we are very deep, I hope. So that's what I wanted to say. Srini, anything to add to that?
I wanted to talk about the issue of entrepreneurship again in many of these contexts. I've traveled to India, we've been to Mendoza in Argentina and Tanzania too. And one thing that I've seen across these contexts, again, is entrepreneurship on the part of the poor to make their circumstances better, to overcome their constraints and things of that nature. So it's always interesting to see these locally emerged solutions to ameliorate their own conditions.
Great.
We also have a question from the participants. We are not only talking about poverty in this class, but about the existence of a marketplace. Why is it defined as a marketplace?
Basically, we are really looking at the intersection of poverty and marketplaces. We have to be very careful. Lots of people have studied poverty and continue to study poverty from very rich disciplines. Our strength is not in studying poverty, it's in studying the intersection of poverty and marketplaces. I view that in at least two ways. One way is how people gain value through exchanges. And those exchanges may be in a formal marketplace, it may be in an informal marketplace, it may be within a community. So how they gain value through exchanges. And of course, the other side of the coin is how they create value through exchanges. Again, it could be in what they create for a formal marketplace, it may be within their community and so on. I also think that we need to understand how people create value in the way they use resources. It's not just an exchange, it's in how you use the forest, how you use the water and so on. I think that's an important piece as well. To me, the marketplace word has always been important because it kind of forces us to say, look, it's not that there is something, we already have that we're going to take there. It's that there is already exchange. Exchange is as old as civilization, exchanges as old as human beings, right? So there is an exchange going on, there are relationships going on, and these are marketplaces in that sense. And they are marketplaces for a variety of different things. And so how do we go in and understand these marketplaces first, and then try to figure out where we fit in? And it's really, to me, that mutual learning mindset. You are good at some things, I'm good at some things. Let me first learn from you. And in that process of learning, let me hold off on my beliefs, hold off on my preconceptions. I can always step back from the field research and then interpret what I learned in light of what I already know. But I think it's so important to have that open interaction as well. So to me, that's why the word marketplace is very important. I think the word markets or markets kind of conjures up this notion that I already have a solution and I'm looking for new markets. And I don't think that's the best approach to gain bottom-up understanding. So that's why I like the word marketplaces a lot. Now, having said that, we don't just focus on products, and we're not done with that. As you saw, we really need to understand the life circumstances, where these marketplaces play out. Why is that? Well, people are deprived on multiple fronts. People don't have the luxury of saying, hey, this is my shopping, and this is my workplace, and so on. In order to have these compartments, right, we need to have resources. So I have a compartment in my life. I have a compartment called my office. I have a compartment which is called my personal time and so on. But in order to separate things, I have the space, I have the material resources to create all of that. All of that is blended in for somebody who's poor. They don't have the space, they don't have the resources. So they are deprived on multiple fronts. And so, for me to go in and say, I'm going to understand exactly this one thing, which is how to enable you to have marketplace literacy, and I don't care about anything else, misses the point. I have to understand how that interfaces with health. I have to understand how that interfaces with livelihood. I have to understand how that interfaces with how people are themselves trying to sustain certain things. Maybe it's their culture, maybe it's their language, and so on. And unless I understand that, I don't have the big picture. Now, do I need to understand that if I want to design something for Srini's kitchen? Not as much, because I kind of know how Srini's kitchen looks like. By the way, it looks very neat, I want to tell you, and he's a good cook. But his kitchen has a certain layout to it. And so I know how to design for his kitchen. But can I design for somebody who's living in a hut in Haiti? No. And there I really need this bottom-up understanding, because I don't know how the solution is going to be used. I may think I have an optimal design, but that's an optimal design controlling for a lot of different things. It's not optimal when I think about children running around and that particular product. Maybe it's a stove, it's at the bottom of a, it's on the floor of a hut and so on. And so really, I think for us, marketplaces is an important way to learn. And marketplaces in the context of life circumstances and communities is very important as well. I want to again mention mutual learning mindset, because I may think I'm an expert at something, but I can be sure of one thing: the person I'm meeting is an expert at survival. There's a lot I can learn from them. And it's like anything else. And in the end, I may think that I'm helping them, but I end up helping myself a lot, just enriching myself and learning about how people live and face challenges.
And the last question from the participants, and maybe for Srini, is how important are entrepreneurs in how important is the role of entrepreneurs in subsistence marketplaces?
So I think the role of entrepreneurs is extremely important, but there are two things going on here, right? So there are entrepreneurs who are within the community, who are embedded within the community, have local knowledge, have relationships with people there locally. And then there are outside entities, which could be NGOs, which could be bottom of the pyramid enterprises, or which could be social enterprises. And it's important for these two to come together, I think. So any effort which is only top down, which tries to impose solutions from the outside without taking into account what already exists, the order that emerges within these contexts, I think would miss the point. And at the same time, I think it's like Madhu said, it's important not to romanticize what already exists and say that they already have a great thing going on. I think being able to see how these two can come together, what we bring to the table, what they will bring to the table, and what solutions one could co-create in order for creating value within those contexts. I think that kind of a mindset, where the top-down perhaps meets the bottom-up, that's an interesting thing.
I just want to add one thing, which is we are using the term entrepreneur very deliberately. They may not be entrepreneurs in creating new to the world innovations, but they are entrepreneurs in the means that they use and in how entrepreneurial they are in using very limited means to achieve end. So we are very deliberate in using that word as well. So with that, thank you for a wonderful discussion, David and Barbara, and the others who are watching as well. Great questions, and you really started something good for us. We will continue this discussion format each week, and we look forward to seeing you online and in our broadcast as well. Thank you, folks. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.